Of course. Here's Section 1 written as you asked, within 1,500 words, focused, character-driven, with no extra headings. The auditorium shimmered under the pale blue luminescence of 1,000 hovering data orbs, each casting ghostly halos over the assembled cadets. Rows upon rows of young aliens, some spindly and translucent, others squat and armored, shifted nervously in their seats. They had traveled from distant corners of the galaxy, sworn to learn from the most formidable civilizations known. Today, however, there was a different kind of lesson planned, and it carried a warning. At the center of the front row sat Kethral, a sharp-eyed Elven with skin like living crystal. His people prided themselves on their rationality and strategic genius. Beside him slouched Brooked, a hulking beast of muscle and fur, bred for war but unfamiliar with the kind fought without honor. The faint hum of conversation trembled through the hall, punctuated by anxious clicks, chirps, and subsonic rumbles in 100 native tongues. When the Grand Instructor stepped onto the dais, a gaunt, grayscale veteran from the Makari front lines, the noise dissolved into silence. His voice rasped through the air, somehow reaching every cadet without amplification. "Today you will witness Earth's legacy," he said. "Not simulations, not sanitized records, raw history. Understand this. Humans are not the most advanced, nor the most populous, but in matters of conflict, they are unmatched." The orbs above flickered, and the footage began. The first images were almost quaint, black and white film of trench warfare. Men caked in mud and blood, charging into machine gun fire with bayonets fixed, faces twisted in fear and determination. Explosions rocked the earth, sending bodies and dirt skyward. Kethral leaned forward, fascinated by the chaotic energy humans wielded so recklessly. Brooks snorted derisively. This was crude by his standards, not war but savagery. Yet as the footage progressed, the cadets' expressions shifted. Scenes from the Second World War flashed by. The storming of beaches under heavy artillery, civilians huddled in bombed-out ruins, tanks grinding over corpses. The humans seemed to have an infinite capacity for violence, each generation inventing deadlier methods to destroy themselves. A shriek erupted from the upper tiers as one of the smaller insectoid cadets collapsed, its limbs spasming uncontrollably. Medics swarmed, lifting the writhing creature out of the hall. A ripple of discomfort passed through the ranks, but the footage did not pause. An old voiceover crackled through the speakers, a human general rallying his troops amid the inferno of war. The cadets had translators implanted in their neural cortexes, but somehow the raw emotion transcended language. The man's speech was not eloquent. It was desperate, defiant, incandescent with a will to endure at any cost. The footage blurred into color. Vietnam, jungle warfare, guerrilla tactics, close-quarter combat where death was delivered by hidden mines, poisoned darts, silent knives. Kethral felt his crystalline skin pulse with unease. This was not clean, strategic engagement. It was pure survival. Humans adapted without honor codes or ritual. They learned to become shadows, monsters if necessary. Brooks' claws flexed involuntarily. Even he, bred for brutality, could not comprehend why these creatures fought on when the logical choice was surrender or retreat. The Makari veteran, standing stoic at the front, seemed almost amused by the cadets' growing horror. When the screen displayed images from the siege of Sarajevo, snipers targeting civilians, endless lines for water under constant threat of death, a low murmur of protest began to spread. One cadet from the aquatic island faction stood abruptly, her gossamer fins quivering in terror. She muttered a resignation formula and fled, her chair clattering loudly behind her. The instructor made no move to halt her, only turned slightly to address the room. "You may leave at any time," he said. "This lesson is not mandatory. Survival is." The footage now displayed modern warfare. Drones circling above anonymous deserts, surgical strikes, the calculated chaos of urban battle zones. A human soldier, separated from his unit, fought through crumbling alleyways, wounded but unstoppable. The cadets watched him scavenge ammunition, set traps, ambush a superior enemy force, and escape into the night like a phantom. "This is madness," hissed Kethral under his breath. "No," rumbled Brooke beside him, voice low. "This is instinct." Around them, cadets shifted, some clutching their abdomens where their secondary hearts thudded wildly. A few made it to the exits. Others froze, unable to move or breathe easily. The footage intensified. Foot soldiers advancing under chemical attack. Men dragging their comrades through fields of death. Moments where individuals, stripped of hope, still chose to fight, to claw their way forward inch by inch. There were no heroes in the footage, only survivors. Kethro found himself sweating, an unprecedented phenomenon for his kind. Why had no one told him the truth? Humanity's strength was not in their technology, nor their numbers. It was their refusal to die on anyone else's terms. Without warning, the scene shifted to a lone woman during an urban skirmish. Bleeding, pinned down, she still managed a radio for artillery support that annihilated an entire enemy position, saving a platoon. The cadets could barely comprehend the duality. Utter fragility paired with catastrophic lethality. The Grand Instructor allowed the room a long moment of silence as the final image burned into their retinas. A human standing atop a ruined landscape, body broken, yet head held high. The orbs dimmed. Cadets whispered among themselves, some arguing, some weeping. The air was thick with tension, the scent of fear palpable even among species who had no olfactory senses. Kethro closed his eyes, trying to stabilize his thoughts. If he had been told humans were brutal, he had misunderstood the scale. They were a paradox made flesh. Creatures who mastered compassion and cruelty with equal precision. Brooke leaned closer, his voice like gravel scraping metal. I thought I knew war. I was wrong. Kethro nodded mutely. Around them, the cadet ranks thinned. Those who stayed seemed somehow changed, their postures tighter, their gazes harder. The instructor watched them impassively, then gestured toward the exit. You have seen only a glimpse, he said. More awaits. Or you may resign now and never face them in the field. Several cadets stood immediately, surrendering their commissions with stiff, awkward movements. The doors hissed open, and they stumbled into the safer corridors beyond. Kethro remained seated. His fists were clenched so tightly that hairline fractures spread across his crystalline knuckles. He did not know if he could survive another showing, but he knew he could not leave. Brooke rose slowly, towering over him. You stay? Kethro nodded once. Good, the beast muttered. We may yet learn what it means to truly fight. As the auditorium lights dimmed again for the next phase, Kethro braced himself. The real war had not even begun. Word count, 1 for 82 words. Would you also like me to continue directly into the next section when you're ready? I can keep the same tone and momentum. Of course. Here's section 2, carefully crafted under 1,500 words, keeping the narrative tight, vivid, and fully character-driven. The lights faded to near darkness, and a heavy silence settled over the remaining cadets. Those who stayed seemed stitched together by a brittle thread of defiance, though none spoke. The Grand Instructor gave no word of comfort, only motioned toward the center of the hall where a new projection took form, a single human figure, blurred by rain and grit, sprinting through a burning cityscape. This time, the footage did not dwell on mass battles or grand strategies. It narrowed, sharpened, and plunged into the depths of human extremity. Special forces, the most distilled form of human warfare. The first images showed a grueling training session labeled Bud/S, Hell Week. Kethro watched, mouth dry, as men and women crawled through mud, so thick it pulled boots from their feet. They staggered under logs heavier than some cadets themselves, the weight grinding down their bodies while instructors screamed into their ears with pitiless ferocity. For days, there was no sleep, only pain, cold, and relentless exertion. It was a miracle any survived. Brooke shifted beside him, a low growl resonating deep within his massive chest. It was not anger or amusement, but a rare thing among his kind. Awe. These humans were not just enduring suffering. They were thriving within it, reshaping themselves into creatures that could not be easily broken. The footage cut to interviews. Men with hollow eyes and cracked voices recalling the moment their minds shattered and how they chose consciously to rebuild them stronger. The alien cadets writhed in their seats. This was not mere training. It was psychological warfare turned inward, a deliberate dismantling of the self in order to forge something utterly lethal. A soft whimper escaped from somewhere in the crowd, followed by the sharp clatter of another cadet bolting for the exits. This time, more followed. Kethriel forced himself to watch. Every muscle fiber in his crystalline form screamed at him to avert his gaze, to forget the monstrous rituals unfolding on the screen. Yet he knew, with a clarity that chilled him, that to survive, to truly survive against humans, he had to understand them. The projection shifted again, this time showing live operations, surgical strikes in tangled city alleys, rescue missions under impossible odds, lone operatives moving through hostile territory unseen, striking with terrifying precision. Human special forces turn every environment into an extension of themselves, whether jungle, desert, or ice. One clip froze the entire hall in terror. A lone operative, wounded and alone, outnumbered 20-1, laying improvised traps, using enemy confusion, fear, and brutality against them. He was not the strongest, nor the fastest. He was simply more willing to endure, to adapt, to turn every weakness into a weapon. Kethriel's breathing became shallow. His mind reeled at the implications. If even a fragment of human will was directed against the galactic forces, what defenses could stand? Beside him, Brooks' fist remained clenched, his knuckles white under coarse fur. He leaned slightly closer, voice a graveled whisper. It is not strength that makes them unstoppable. It is that they have accepted suffering as a part of their existence. The Grand Instructor, sensing the faltering morale, addressed the hall. What you have witnessed is the forging of weapons with flesh and mind. Machines can fail. Numbers can be overwhelmed. But these humans, they bend until the breaking point, and then they bend further. At that, another wave of cadets broke ranks. Some wept openly. Others wore masks of stone, as if hiding shame. Each approached the dais to formally resign, placing a hand on the resignator, a small, cold device that terminated their commission instantly. The line stretched long and unsteady. Kethriel remained. His hands trembled, and small fractures spidered across his palms, but he remained. The footage shifted again, this time deeper into darkness. Scenes emerged of black sites, clandestine missions where operatives disappeared into enemy territories and returned years later, or not at all. Human ingenuity knew no ethical boundary when survival was on the line. Psychological operations, misinformation campaigns, the weaponization of fear itself. Every emotion a target, every weakness a tool. A scene showed a captured human, tortured for weeks. Instead of breaking, he fed false intelligence to his captors, unraveling their operations from within. When finally rescued, he was barely alive, yet managed a broken smile as his handlers praised his performance. Brooke grunted low in his throat. This one was already dead, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. Only his purpose kept him breathing. The surviving cadets said nothing. No commentary could soften what they had seen. Kethriel realized that in the galactic wars he had studied, strength and honor were praised above all. Humans valued those things too, but when survival was at stake, they were willing to discard pride, comfort, even sanity. They would crawl through their own blood to tear victory from the jaws of annihilation. When the final clip faded into blackness, only a few dozen cadets remained from the original assembly. The Grand Instructor surveyed them with a gaze both proud and sorrowful. You have witnessed the truth, he said quietly. Those who face humans must understand. You do not defeat them by overpowering them. You survive them by outlasting what they are willing to endure. Kethriel swallowed, feeling the jagged pain of his own fractured hands. The truth was a blade driven deep into the soul. Brooke placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, and for the first time since the beginning of the session, Kethriel saw the beast's respect. Not for the humans, nor the instructors, but for him. We are few, Brooke said, voice low, but maybe we are enough. The Grand Instructor stepped back, allowing the silence to speak louder than any farewell. Those who remained stood slowly, together, moving toward the next chamber where the real trials would begin. Not simulations, not theories, but full immersion into doctrines of Earth's greatest warriors. As Kethriel crossed the threshold, he felt the sharp divide between what he had been and what he was becoming. Behind him, the doors sealed with a soft finality. There was no turning back now. In the darkened hall beyond, the next challenge awaited, patient and merciless as humanity itself. Word count, 1, for 80 words. Would you like me to continue into Section 3 as well? I can carry the same deep tone and momentum into the next evolution of the story, if you want. Of course. Here's Section 3, carefully crafted under 1,500 words, continuing the intense, character-driven story. The chamber beyond was nothing like the sterile training halls they had known. It was vast and dim, lit only by a lattice of cold blue lines crisscrossing the ceiling. Mist clung to the floor, veiling the ground in a shifting shroud. The survivors, Kethril, Brooke, and the others, formed a loose circle, each wary of the silence pressing down upon them. Without warning, a deep vibration thrummed to the floor, and from the mist emerged towering simulacra, human warriors, formed of light and matter, their faces expressionless, their movements precise and relentless. They were not shown as villains or monsters. They were simply human, and that truth was somehow more terrifying. A mechanical voice echoed overhead, devoid of warmth. Engage, survive, adapt. The constructs lunged forward without hesitation. Kethril barely ducked in time as a heavy fist tore through the space where his head had been. Brooke roared, meeting a pair of attackers head-on, his sheer mass temporarily halting their charge. Around them, the other cadets scattered, reacting with instincts honed for more predictable threats. But these simulacra moved with chaotic precision, weaving strategies mid-battle, adjusting seamlessly to every defensive move. Kethril dodged another strike, narrowly avoiding a crippling blow to his midsection. He realized, with shudder of dread, that brute strength would not save them here. These foes were not designed to overpower through force alone. They were designed to exploit weakness, hesitation, fear. Brooke bellowed, slamming one construct into ground, but another immediately replaced it, faster, smarter, adapting to his tactics. Blood gleamed in ragged trails across his arms. Kethril scrambled to Brooke's side, their instincts aligning without words. He feinted left while Brooke swung wide, creating a fleeting opening. Together, they drove back the construct for a few precious seconds. Yet, even in victory, the simulacra learned. Their next wave was faster, more ruthless. Across the battlefield, cadets fell, overwhelmed by a foe that was not merely strong but relentlessly intelligent. One by one, they vanished into the mist, their cries swallowed by the mechanized hum that filled the chamber. Panic gnawed at Kethril's mind. His vision blurred, not from injury, but from the oppressive realization that survival meant abandoning the old ways, the ritualized combat of his people, the honor codes that had defined him. Brooke caught his eye mid-battle, a fierce, questioning look. Adapt, it said without needing words. Kethril made a decision. He abandoned his stance, letting chaos dictate his movements. He used the environment, shoving mist into the simulacra's optics, using debris as weapons, laying traps of opportunity. He feigned weakness, luring one enemy close, then striking an exposed joint with brutal efficiency. Brooke followed his lead, his attacks growing less formal, more viciously unpredictable. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to shift. The constructs stumbled in their perfection, momentarily baffled by the sudden randomness of the cadets' assault. But victory remained elusive. The chamber's voice returned, colder than before. Pain is the greatest teacher. The mist thickened, and from it emerged new constructs, not soldiers, but civilians. Weeping children, wounded elders, terrified innocents. Kethril hesitated. His mind recoiled in horror. Brooke froze beside him, fists clenching and unclenching. The constructs moved toward them, slow, vulnerable, begging without words. The cadets faltered. Some lowered their weapons. Some simply collapsed in confusion. And that was when the true attack began. Hidden within the illusions, real constructs, armed ruthless, struck with lethal precision. A cadet to Kethril's right screamed as a blade of pure energy tore through his chest. Another fell, without even realizing the child before him was a mask. The lesson was clear, brutal, and unforgettable. Human enemies will weaponize everything. Trust, compassion, hope to win. Kethril gritted his teeth, the fractures in his crystalline skin deepening. He forced himself to see through the illusions, to strike only when sure of the threat. Every decision weighed heavy. Every mistake carved a deeper wound into his soul. Beside him, Brooke moved with grim determination, no longer hesitating at false faces. Together, they cut a path through the chaos, surviving not through brute force, but by making choices no warrior should ever have to make. When at last the last simulacrum fell, silence reclaimed the chamber. The mist receded. The surviving cadets, fewer than a dozen now, gathered in a broken line, bloodied, hollow-eyed. Above them, the Grand Instructor's image shimmered into view. His gaze was not triumphant, but burdened. "You understand now," he said softly. "Victory against humanity is not a contest of strength or speed. It is a contest of will, of morality, of how much you are willing to lose of yourself before you lose the war." No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Kethril looked at his hands, cracked and trembling. He barely recognized them. He barely recognized himself. Brooke placed a hand on his shoulder, not in comfort, but in solidarity. They had crossed a threshold, and the beings they had been before would never return. The chamber door slid open, revealing a narrow, darkened corridor. The path ahead was uncertain, but retreat was no longer possible. Without a word, Kethril stepped forward. Brooke followed, and behind them, the last survivors moved as one. Whatever trials awaited them next, they would face them with eyes wide open, and the grim knowledge that survival demanded the sacrifice of everything they once believed sacred. Word count, 1 for 65 words. Would you like me to go ahead and immediately continue into Section 4? I can keep the momentum strong. Absolutely. Here's Section 4, carefully crafted under 1,500 words, to bring this phase of the story to a powerful and satisfying point. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, its walls narrowing the deeper they ventured. Soft pulses of dim light illuminated their path, revealing strange glyphs etched into the stone, alien yet somehow familiar. Each step echoed, a steady drumbeat against the suffocating silence. Kethril led, his movements deliberate, senses stretched taut. Brooke lumbered behind, his massive frame casting long shadows that twisted in the low light. The few remaining cadets clung to formation, the lessons of the chamber carved into their bones. As they advanced, the air grew heavier, tinged with the metallic scent of fear. It was no longer the wild, thrashing fear of children facing nightmares. It was colder now, more measured, the fear of soldiers who understood the stakes and bore them anyway. The corridor ended abruptly at a colossal door, its surface scarred and battered, as if it had withstood countless assaults. A single panel glowed at its center. Kethril approached, pressing his fractured palm against it. A shudder ran through the structure. Gears groaned. The door split open. Beyond lay a vast arena, circular, ringed with observation towers that bristled with weaponry. Standing at its heart, waiting with the patience of stone, was a human, real, not a construct. Clad in simple combat fatigues, he bore no insignia of rank, no grand armor. Only his stance betrayed him, relaxed, yet utterly prepared. His gaze swept over the entering cadets, cool and assessing, as one might study weapons on a rack. The Grand Instructor's voice returned, laced now with something heavier than before, respect, perhaps, or resignation. You have learned their endurance, their adaptability, their ruthlessness. Now, you'll confront the source of it all. The human stepped forward. He did not speak, did not threaten. His very presence was enough. Kethril could feel it, a density of will, a gravity that threatened to tear lesser beings apart. The challenge was not declared. It was simply understood. Kethril exchanged a glance with Brooke. No words were needed. This was the culmination of everything they had endured. As they spread out, the human moved with astonishing grace, flowing like water, striking like lightning. He did not overpower. He overwhelmed to precision, anticipating movements before they were even fully formed. Every cadet who rushed him fell swiftly, painlessly, as if swatted aside by an invisible hand. Brooke roared in charge, his immense strength shaking the very ground. The human met him without fear, sidestepping with minimal effort, and delivering a strike that crumpled the giant's knee inward with a sickening crack. Kethriel hesitated only a heartbeat before launching forward. He abandoned all formality, attacking with every scrap of instinct and desperation he possessed. The human parried easily, almost lazily, but Kethriel's unpredictability forced him to adjust. A glancing blow brushed the human's shoulder, the first to land. The human smiled, faintly. It was not cruelty nor mockery. It was recognition. Kethriel felt a surge of adrenaline, of something darker and sharper rising inside him. He pressed the attack, weaving, striking, retreating, refusing to be predictable. Around them, the others rallied, wounded but not defeated. They adapted on the fly, learning from each other's mistakes, using their diversity as a weapon. For a moment, just a breath, it seemed they might actually hold their own. But the human was not merely a soldier. He was a culmination, a reflection of a species that had refined survival into an art. His counterattacks became a symphony of violence, his movements impossibly fluid. One by one, the cadets fell again, though now they fell fighting with ferocity that defied their injuries. Kethriel felt his strength ebbing, fractures spiderwebbing deeper into his crystalline body. Every movement screamed protest. His vision dimmed at the edges, yet something inside him refused to break. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to endure, to prove that he could. The human paused, as if sensing the shift in Kethriel's spirit. Their gazes locked across the thinning battlefield. In that silent moment, an understanding passed between them, not of enemies, but of survivors. The human lowered his stance slightly, almost inviting the next attack. Kethriel obliged. He charged, reckless, a howl tearing from his lips. Not to defeat, but to challenge, to be seen. Their clash was brief, a flurry of strikes and counters too fast for the eye to follow. Kethriel knew he would fall. He accepted it, but he also knew he would leave a mark. At the last instant, he twisted, letting the human's momentum drive him close. A shard from Kethriel's fractured palm sliced a thin line across the human's forearm, shallow, insignificant in the grand scheme, but undeniable. The human stepped back, studying the blood welling from the scratch. He looked at Kethriel again, and this time he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. The Grand Instructor's voice broke through the quiet. Enough. The human stepped away, fading into the shadows without a word. The arena lights dimmed. Medics rushed in to tend the wounded. Kethriel collapsed to one knee, gasping, his body barely holding together. Brooke limped over, one arm dangling uselessly, his face twisted with pain and grim satisfaction. We didn't win, Kethriel rasped, voice like broken glass. Brooke managed a crooked grin. We survived. The Grand Instructor approached, his robes whispering across the stone floor. He regarded the battered cadets not with pity, but with a fierce pride. You have faced the heart of human warfare, he said. You have learned the final truth. Survival is not about defeating them. It is about becoming something they cannot predict, something they cannot destroy. He gestured to the shattered group. You are no longer cadets. You are operatives, and your true training begins now. Kethriel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle into his bones. The path ahead would not be easier. It would be worse. Far worse. But he had chosen it. He had seen the darkness, and chosen to walk through it. As the surviving operatives rose, gathering their battered forms into a rough line, Kethriel felt something bloom inside him. Not hope, not pride. Resolve. The doors at the far end of the arena opened onto a blinding light, and without hesitation he stepped forward into it, Brooke limping at his side. Whatever waited beyond, they would face it not as cadets shaped by tradition, but as survivors forged by fire. And this time they would be ready. Word count, 1 for 70 words. Would you also like a full, clean, compiled version of all 4 sections in a single flow afterward? It would read like a complete novella.